Brandon, are you able to speak just so I can make sure I have audio?
Yeah, for sure. Hi, everyone. You hear me?
No, for some reason I don't have audio. All right, I'll work on that. Just one moment, please.
How you doing, Natalie? Can you hear us? All right, sorry about that, people. Just 1 second. We'll fix this.
All right, sorry about that, everyone. Let's see, Brandon, are you able to say something just to make sure I can hear you?
Yep.
All right, very good. I'm on. Okay, wonderful. All right. I guess I guess we should get started. We're at 5 after. I'd like to introduce myself. First of all, my name is Natalie James. I am a member of NLSW 2320. My unit is LSSA, and I am a staff attorney in the UAC housing unit. I will be facilitating today, and I will first of all want to say welcome to everyone and thank you for coming. This is an event that is open to all members, that is organized by members and organizers in ALAA 2325 and 2320 NLSW, so that we could collectively discuss what a new direction for 9A would look like. I should note that this is not an event that is endorsed by either of these locals. This is a campaign event by the Brandon Mancilla campaign. This event is being recorded and live streamed. Brandon is part of the UAW Members United Slate, looking to build on the victory of one member, one vote, by further democratizing the UAW and building a militant fighting union across the UAW. And finally, I will mention that we will be employing a stack system. If you wish to speak, please write stack in the chat. I will recognize you, but we will be having a progressive stack system. So in this meeting, that will mean prioritizing rank and file members over staff in the stack. So with that, I will hand it over to Brandon, who will introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming, and I'm excited to have our conversation today. My name is Brandon Mancilla. I am a member of Local 5118, the UAW, the Harvard Graduate Students Union, and I'm also currently an organizer with ALA, Local 2325. Some more background about me: I use the he, him pronouns. I grew up in New York City, in Queens, to an immigrant family from Guatemala. My grandfather and my father were both union members. My dad is still a proud member of 32BJ SEIU here in New York City. So, was born into a labor family, very labor-oriented family, and one in which we knew the direct impact that organizing and organized labor has on families and communities, especially in a community such as an immigrant family from Central America in the 1980s and 90s, in which folks weren't really organized into unions, right? It's very exploited labor force to this day. I joined the organizing campaign as a graduate student at Harvard University, and was part of the organizing committee, part of the group that coordinated and organized the strike of 2019. When we reached the first contract, I was elected president of the local, the very first president of the local. And during that time, we set up a local, went back to negotiating again pretty soon after that, given the fact that we had only a 1-year contract to then build upon to really have a real first longer term contract. And at the same time, setting up the local, trying to build a democratic local, enforcing a contract that needed to be enforced very seriously and very aggressively, given that the billion-dollar corporation that is Harvard University was not going to just simply follow it without enforcement. I think, as we all know that. And currently, after taking a leave of absence to the organizing, I have been working with ALA since February of this year, where I've been organizing new shops, fighting grievances, training new delegates, new stewards, delegates as we call them in ALA, and also negotiating first contracts and successor agreements at many of the organizations that have been newly organized, and some of the shops or chapters that have been around for longer, which include the Legal Aid Society and some of the new ones, NDS Detroit, Prisoners Legal Services, NILAG, NICE, which is the New Immigrant Community Empowerment. That's not a legal services organization, but an immigrant community empowerment organization, and others. During this time, I think I've gotten to know many of the leaders and organizers and members within the legal services sector. And when I decided to run for regional director of 9A, this was one of the first ideas that folks from 2320 and 2325 came by and were like really pushing for, so that we could have a conversation about what building a militant, democratic, and empowering movement would look like. And the reason I'm running, frankly, is to build that democratic movement, to bring us together in a way that we haven't had the chance to do, definitely in recent history, but probably for longer, in which we are actually building a union culture within legal services, having the conversations and the organizing efforts that would build power, not only sectorally, but within the communities that workers in legal services represent and also are a part of. And I think that's a crucial question, because it takes us to two very important places. Number one, what would it mean to organize sectorally? In places like New York City, for example, union density within public defense organizations has gotten close to 100%, back to where we were just 3 decades ago, before the strike breaking that occurred in the 90s. And as organizing has grown throughout the recent years, and interest in organizing and in building a powerful union movement has grown, especially in the last 3 to 5 years. The question must be asked again, like, what can we do with that power? And that can only be answered not by leadership, not by just continuing things as usual, but by actually creating the forums and creating the spaces for the members to be able to speak to one another and actually work towards a common goal. And what that common goal is something we have to work on, right? It's something we have to build together collectively, and be able to discuss. But there's a ton of potential, and the potential is to build sectoral power that, number one, fights for and wins strong contracts, right, that we're able to build upon from one shop to another, no longer bargaining in isolation, but actually building upon each other's wins and coordinating collectively contract campaigns, expirations, possible strikes, other kinds of actions to be able to improve the lives of our members. But then the second question is, since so many of us are already, by nature of the work and also by nature of the issues that legal services workers are taking on, the question is, what can we also do beyond just winning strong contracts that benefit members? And from here, we can learn from the strong traditions of both ALA and NOLSW to rebuild that labor movement, especially within these two locals. And these are ideas, again, that members have put forward and I think have built within the platform that we're trying to build for a new direction for 9A, one that centers bargaining for the common good, which is a simple idea that when we enter the bargaining room, we're not just entering to improve our wages and healthcare and other rights at the workplace, but also bargaining and waging our power, our strength in this industry or in the industries that we're a part of to win reforms and radical changes across our city, our state, our country, and the different communities that we're engaged in struggle with. So to talk through all these different ideas, I think it's the first step is to bring us together like we are in this space. And I'm really excited by that possibility.
Well, thank you, Brandon. And so I'm going to ask Brandon a question, and then we'll have probably around 40 minutes for you all to ask questions, because this is, after all, a town hall and we want to hear from you. But I'm going to start things off with a single question. I come from a housing background, so it'll be a housing question. So right now we're in an eviction crisis. Many tenants are facing eviction in the midst of this pandemic, and you know, practitioners and shop members who are in housing units are facing untenable caseloads. Meanwhile, many providers have shut off intake altogether, and the right to counsel is not being observed by the court system as they forge ahead with evictions. So what would you do about this crisis?
Yeah, I think, you know, the situation is really dire. I think that's obviously something we all know. You know, I think my approach in the way I think about the organizing potential that we have is to, it first starts with empowering members engaged in the work already, right? These aren't, you know, ideas that we have to think out of thin air, how to combat these kinds of crises. Members are already engaged in these kinds of struggles. The problem is we're not using our union power at the moment to the fullest potential that we can to fight back against these crises. So the first thing to do is for members to know that as regional director, I would stand right beside them and fighting with them, alongside them, taking the lead from them as you know, housing advocates, housing rights fighters, and housing attorneys. This also means being able to use our resources, right, as the UAW, to start making alliances with tenants unions and to really deepen those alliances and make them significant, to make those alliances with organizations or movements such as, you know, Right to Counsel, Housing Court Must Change, Housing Justice for All, beyond just like a signature or isolated, you know, meetings or not isolated, but small meetings of folks engaging in those meetings or in those spaces as activists, but also to put your union hat on when you go into those meetings, right? In order to put your union hat on to go into those meetings, it's not just an individual choice of a member saying, I'm going into this as a UAW member. We need the backing of leadership to be able to do those initiatives. And we know that we're going to have a union that mobilizes its power and resources behind those kinds of fights. I said a little bit about bargaining for the common good in a more abstract sense, but here's one way to think about this, right? A very important, right, aspect of this is to, you know, establish, you know, caseload caps, for example, right, that are addressing the issues that attorneys and support staff are dealing with as we confront the crisis, right? So that they're never work. So we encourage, the employers to hire more, so that we're also pushing for funding and that kind of thing. But bargaining for the common good, that perspective is pushing you also to think about keeping people in their homes, right? And also being able to fundamentally reform housing, the structure of housing and housing policy within our cities, within the country as a whole. That is a much bigger project, right, than just one person's or one organization's or one union's contract. It's one that has to be coordinated, right? It has to be something that is done union wide, and then hopefully even beyond just the union that we have, the unions that we have within the UAW. I'll also say that I think these are the kinds of questions that have already been discussed and are starting to, or have been for a while, won by the different members within our unions, right? Shops have won things like caseload caps beyond indigent defense, for example, in the housing areas. Just recently, I was in a bargaining committee with NILAG, in which for the first time, they've won a caseload cap that will especially address the housing unit at NILAG. And I think it's not yet a tentative agreement on a whole contract, but it's definitely a big step forward in bargaining. The next question, though, that folks at NILAG are going to want to start asking is, how can we start working with CAMBA? How can we start working with other folks within ALA, and then also with LSSA and other folks in 2320 to build a housing justice movement as a UAW, right? So I think those are the kinds of approaches that I think are going to be important for us to have.
Thank you. So like I mentioned, folks, if you would like to ask a question or make a comment, write Stack in the chat. So far, we have Karen Rosenberg on Stack. And go ahead, Karen.
Thank you. Brandon, it's nice to meet you and hear from you. And you sound like you've got some enthusiasm, some energy, some good ideas for how to move forward on issues and get members engaged in them. I want to preface my question by mentioning the invitation to this forum, because it says that Region 9A has treated Local 2320 and Local 2325 as an afterthought. And I feel like it's both a good preface to my question, and it's incumbent on me to say that that's really just not remotely true. I've been a member of NLSW for 30 years, and I actually was fortunate enough to meet and work alongside some of the people who were founders of our union. Very proud of that. And actually, the reason why NLSW affiliated with the UAW in the first place 46 years ago was because we felt like it was necessary for the survival of our programs and the work we were doing to have the backing of a powerful union, the political resources, the resources to fight the fights that legal services programs and workers have fought for, all those decades, to protect the funding, to fight against regulations that were designed to destroy legal services, to find workarounds when regulations came in, including starting a lot of other social justice organizations, which have been organized by 2320. But we've always had the support of the region, the regional directors who have, through them, gotten us the full support of the international. And it's been really critical to our union. And, on an ongoing basis, it's something that we all care about and worry about. I also just want to point out that the region not only doesn't think of 2320 as an afterthought, but it actually shows a lot of respect for our local by having hired at least 7 people I can think of to work for the region. So there's a lot of local 2320 in our region. There always has been. And the best example of that, of course, is Gordon Dean, who Bev Brakeman chose to have as her assistant director, who is the heart and soul of NLSW, was the president for 12 years.
I'm sorry, Karen. I hate to break you off, but
sure.
we have about 7 people on stack
Yep.
right now.
I'll move on to my question. I also just wanted to point out that the political director of the region is the former president of 2325. So, these are people who would have a lot of interest and would be very supportive of the kind of political initiatives that you're talking about, and that I would love to see. So I guess getting to the point here, it is critically important to our local, not just that we have a regional director who respects and listens to us and does his or her best to get us what we need, but also that person has the clout on the IEB, on the International Executive Board, and also in the political realm to be able to, get us the support and the resources we need to fight these fights. So my question is that we have people who are currently in the region who demonstrably are able to do that and have done that. And what I know about you is that you're a very enthusiastic, talented, intelligent, new member of the UAW of, a couple of years, who, I would be very excited to see become more active and gain experience and grow in the position. But this is not an entry-level position. It would take a long time to just talk about everything you have to do to run a union of this size. We have like 40,000 members in this region. And so my question for you is that, how do you answer the concern that you don't have the experience or the credibility to do the job that you're asking us to put you in?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think I think the direct answer to your question is that I am directly engaged in the struggles that we're talking about today, just like anyone else in this room. So I am not an outsider coming into this fight by any means. I think another point that I would make is that the concerns that have shaped my platform and the platform of the campaign and the ideas I think we're talking about today are coming directly from the membership. And respectfully, I think that's the difference between the two visions, if you want to call them that, of what we're talking about with the future of the region, and why I think we have one member, one vote in the first place, to be able to have these discussions and let the members decide what direction they want to go in. And I'm personally also a local staff member. I've been a staff member also at HGSU as well. So I definitely know how important it is to have, staff that come out from the shops, from the struggles, from the campaigns. But I also think that that's not the end all be all of what we're doing when building a union movement. It's to put in the powers in the hands of the membership, and the strategizing also in the hands of the membership. And the membership, I think, as exemplified in the platform, are the ones pushing forward these ideas. And that's the kind of leadership that I think we need to be embracing, because at the end of the day, you can have the most talented speaker, leader, coordinator, manager, etc., leading a place or having had a lot of staff experience, but it's the membership and power, and in the end, of the labor movement that leads to change, fundamental change that we're discussing here. So I think that's how how I'd answer that.
Okay, thank you. So we have a bunch of other people on stack. Let's move on. Next on stack is Molly.
I'll keep it really quick. Thanks so much, Brandon. I'm really excited about your candidacy. Definitely planning to support you. I was just kind of wondering, since this is our first direct election, and I do think you are a kind of candidate who will like shake up the traditional power structures at the top of the union, which is amazing. And I think we need that. Do you expect to experience any like pushback or retaliation from the International Executive Board, especially towards like Region 9A generally? Because I don't know that they would be super thrilled to have like the really necessary new changes that you're bringing in, and how like have you thought about that? How would you plan to kind of tackle that if you experienced it? Thanks.
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. As like Natalie said in the introduction, I am part of a slate, right? I'm not running alone. I'm running as part of a slate called UAW Members United, which is proposing democratic and militant changes within the UAW, within the regional director candidates that the slate's running, and also the other top positions on the National Executive Board that we're running candidates with as well. So in many ways, yes, it is a challenge to the way things have been done. I think, as many of you know, but if you don't, the UAW has had one caucus in control of the IEB for over 60 years. And I think there's no, it's absolutely true that I think the links between one caucus in power for that long is directly impacting on the job losses that have been faced across the auto sector and manufacturing, and a lot of the concessionary contracts that have been faced in those sectors. And I think more deeply, I think a top-down kind of understanding what organizing should look like. And I think that affects us, especially in NA, where a lot of new organizing is happening, and where a lot of victories have been happening, because I think organizing members, want to organize and give power to membership in these organizing drives and these bargaining and contract campaigns, et cetera. As an IEB member, I think, if I were to be elected, I do think I would expect pushback. But again, that's the point of having democratic elections, right? You have the mandate from your membership who voted for you to put you in there. And any attempt to push back against attempts made by that regional director or that IEB member who is not within the majority group, if the majority group happens to be the administration caucus, again, in power, it would be a pushback against the membership of that region as well. And I think those are necessary questions that we need to be asking as a union, as an international union at this moment.
All right, thank you. Next we have Carolina.
Hi, I'm with the NOLSW 2320 out of Massachusetts. And I have I guess a practical question about funding. You mentioned funding. In order to increase membership, we need more funding. Most of the funding in Massachusetts, a lot of it comes out of the state legislature. We, on a yearly basis, go and lobby aggressively, primarily for legal services funding. That's one of the major asks when the UAW goes into the State House with regard to increase in funding. And we've been successful in the past 3 years, progressively increasing our funding to the tunes of extra millions of dollars every year. What participation have you had? You were at Harvard and you were obviously with the UAW. Did you have with regard to lobbying efforts for increased funding specifically for legal services, as well as other causes? But that was always one of our primary asks.
Yeah, of course. So when I was president of 5118, I was part of the CAP Council as president, and also during that time, another member of 5118 became part of the CAP Council leadership as well. And I think that means that I think the concerns of the future of the CAP, I think are in the hands of people who want to work in this struggle, right? Who want to be advancing the very things you're saying. I can speak to personally a funding situation that I recently had to deal with as an organizer with 2325. Last year, we organized a shop in Detroit called NDS Detroit, NDS Harlem, has been under contract for a couple of years, but
I'm in a
uh,
meeting.
sorry. But they recently expanded to Detroit and also Texas, and there's talks of further expansion by the organization. So, I think, so I think we had some challenges, some unique challenges to deal with. I was, put on as one of the lead negotiators of that bargaining committee as when I first started, and we had to basically create a caseload standard for the attorneys and the staff there that didn't exist before. Wayne County didn't have one, and it was directly impacting folks because they were having over 150 cases to deal with. And it was a major bargaining demands. Workload and attrition issues were what led them to organize in the first place. And in order to win that caseload standard that we ended up ratifying just yesterday in a new contract, we had to engage in lobbying in order to essentially create a pilot program coordinated through lobbying efforts with the organization, through the union, and with the Michigan Indigenous Defense Commission, and also Wayne County and its representatives, to essentially establish a pilot program on caseload standards. Now, the standard is not in effect yet. We have to basically, in the contract, we agreed to joint efforts to actually, present a plan for that pilot program to get funded. But in order to get to that point and be able to take that seriously and not just it be empty contract language, we essentially had to speak to all these bodies I talked about, the MIDC and the county representatives, to assure that the funding will be there when we agree to this contract. And also that agreement would also help the organization NDS actually commit to being part of that effort, because that was their worry. Their worry was, we are going to keep asking for more money, and that's a problem. We don't think we can commit this language, which would require more funding because we need to hire more people. That's the effort that we did, and we were successful. And I think now we're on to the next stage of that, which is actually to finalize and secure that funding. But yeah, I'm very sensitive to these questions. I've had to deal with them directly. And, as regional director, there would be, no change in that attitude.
Hey, thank you. All right, we have several more people on stack. We'll start with John Navi, please.
Johnnaby, yeah.
I'm sorry, I got
No worries, it's okay, no problem. So I wanted to ask about an issue that I care a lot about. So for the folks I don't know here in the meeting, I am a criminal public defender here in New York City. I'm a member of ALAA, a newish member of the last couple of years. I was part of the organizing committee for my shop, which is NDS Harlem, which Brandon just mentioned, our sister shop. So when I joined ALAA, one of the things I was really excited that our union was working on was a no cop union or no police union resolution, which our ALAA passed, I think, before you joined. And I had a chance to actually talk to our current regional director directly about that, to ask, what to say that, we passed this resolution. This was the overwhelming position of our members, that we should, be moving and organizing towards police unions being disaffiliated from the AFL-CIO and other organizations that we're part of. And, what support can you give us, and how can you support us in organizing towards this? And I was really disappointed that our current regional director responded to say that, this is something you can bring up in several years at the Constitutional Convention, but didn't give us any path towards connecting with other locals that are organizing on this issue, or any other ideas really that we could work in the present towards. So I guess, Brandon, my question to you is that a commitment that you're willing to make to continue and support organizing on that issue? And what ideas would you have if we wanted to work on that as when you were regional director?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, I fully support the effort of disaffiliation of cop unions with the AFL-CIO. This is what I'm talking about with, membership power, right? It's to me, it's not a, it's not a question of taking things to the convention. Absolutely, you can submit things to the convention. There's plenty of resolutions that didn't make it onto the floor at the convention. And those resolutions, the ones that don't make it on the floor sometimes are the ones that are most challenging, right? To the status quo. And I think, so we can't just wait on that, right? Even if like that would be the path for the UAW as a whole to take on that initiative. As a region, we could start by acting on it, right? So my commitment is absolutely there. But beyond that, I think that's an issue we should be talking through at the CAP Council. I think we should also be vocally opposing the further empowerment of police in our communities, in our cities, and in the country, the militarization, the carceral culture that is developed, has developed in this country. And that's our labor power. Our labor power is also not, it should be used to speak out on and organize around and against these kinds of this kind of violence that is happening, and especially a union that is committed politically to changing and providing alternatives to folks that are not disciplinary and carceral. I think having leadership that is committed to that same idea is absolutely crucial. And I think furthering our commitments to social movements, taking the lead from folks who've already engaged with the communities that we're talking about. And further, I think also like, starting to organize more in low-wage communities, communities that have been directly targeted by this state violence is going to also be important, because they'll bring also a unique perspective to these questions that is not so, that is not one in which feels at this moment that even though it isn't removed, it does feel removed. Like we have to say something about this crisis that we're not directly involved in, yet like many of our members are. And I think if the more we continue organizing, poorer and lower wage workers, the more these kinds of questions are going to come to the forefront, I think, especially in the cities that are represented in our region.
Okay, so I will go next to Mary, and then after Mary will be Jeremy, just so you get ready in terms of your baby carriage positioning. Mary, are you available?
Are you talking Mary Ann or Mary?
Let's see, I had jotted down Mary. Were you on stack? Did you put?
Yes.
Then that would be you, I believe. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Hi, I'm a retired member of Local 2320, and my home shop is California Rural Legal Assistance, where I worked in the 70s and later. My question is about voting for regional director. Many of us in NOLSW 2320 are around the country, not just in 9A. Do you have any idea, Brandon, where will we be voting for regional director? Will we be voting in 9A or in our regions where we live and work?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. I think given that the members of NLSW, even though, all over the country, I think are directly connected to the regional director of 9A. And 9A is, I think, in many ways, the home base for a lot of the activities and conversations that are happening within LSW. Now, it is my understanding that the UAW International is pushing for members of NLSW to vote in the different geographical regions that the shops are located in or people are living in, instead of in 9A. This would be different than what just happened at the Constitutional Convention, in which all NLSW delegates sat with and voted as in 9A in Detroit in July. So that's something that I think I've made the UAW, the Federal Monitor aware of, and they're looking into it. But it is my position that NLSW members should be voting in Region 9A, but don't have further clarity on that at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, Jeremy.
Thanks, Brandon, and thanks everyone for your great questions. I am a member of Campbell Legal Services Workers United, and in 23-25, we were one of the first shops to have attorneys and non-attorneys in our chapter. 23-20 has been a lot further ahead of us for a lot longer, so props to you all. But I was wondering, how do you see the relationship between attorney and non-attorney work in legal services? And are there parallels to other sectors? Are there things we can learn? I think it's a strength to draw from it, and I'm curious what you think more broadly.
Yeah, you're asking essentially about like wall-to-wall unions?
Exactly, yeah, wall to wall.
Yeah, I mean, they're the, you know, they're the core, I think, of power within unions when you organize every single person within a shop, and not just a specific group. And I think that's like the industrial model of organizing, right? Organize everyone rather than in crafts or in different groups or specific skilled workers, et cetera. NLSW, to my knowledge, has always prioritized this kind of organizing model. And I think that's something to learn from, right? As you know, and I think 23-25, as it's continued to organize new shops, I think now is extremely committed to that idea. You know, famously, 23-25 was, you know, the Legal Aid Society attorneys at its inception, and some of the support staff went 1199 SEIU. But just recently, and this is another contract that I'm working on, the investigator and interpreter unit joined ALAA. Now, they're not within the same bargaining unit as the Legal Aid Society attorneys, but they are negotiating right now at the same time as the attorneys, and excited to see what we can do collaborating and working with each other as we you know, put forward you know, pretty ambitious set of demands to try to win in new contracts. But yeah, I mean, parallels to other industries. I mean, you know, every industry has to face that question, right? And I think it's also been a very crucial question within the history of the labor movement. Within our own region, I think, you know, I'm very interested in seeing what's happening at the campuses, for example, right? Where take a place like Columbia University, where the support staff and the postdoc researchers and the academic workers, the student workers, are all unionized now in UAW in different locals, right? They're not part of one local, but it's I think it'll be interesting to see how organizing and campaigning for contracts and fights go forward there. I know there's that's something that's very interesting to the different you know, organizers and members of those unions to see how to deepen those connections, especially now that they all have contracts. The student workers just ratified earlier this winter. So I think the campuses are a good place to look at, where even if they're not all UAW, right? Seeing how those relationships are happening, but other unions that want to continue to think about organizing those who were not organized the first time in the first drive and expanding their units or introducing a new unit into the local. I think those are all you know, fascinating, I think, organizing ideas that need to be fully supported.
Great, thank you. All right, next we have Reed.
All right, hi everybody. I hope everyone can hear me okay. So I'm just really thankful for Brandon for making this space. I'm really excited about your candidacy. I think you're bringing a lot of issues to the forefront that are really important. So thank you on that. I will say, so one issue was that ALAA has issued a no cop union resolution, right? That we are seeking to expel the police unions from the UAW. But that being said, I do just want to name check, and this might be a problem for some people, but I do just want to name check the fact that the Legal Aid Society does have a division of attorneys called the Juvenile Rights Practice. And some of those attorneys defend children from accused of crimes. So that we accept that, but there is a portion of their practice which is about prosecuting parents that's essentially acting in a policing function. So I do think that as a region, it's a conversation that we can have going forward about the role of the Legal Aid Society juvenile rights practice in our region, and their role as that they could be perceived as quasi police or quasi law enforcement, specifically the ones that represent children. So I'm just naming that. But I also want to bring up the issue of sectoral bargaining, and I appreciate, Brandon, that you brought that to the table, because I think that that's clearly the issue. So one question I have for you, Brandon, will be about how do you envision sectoral bargaining working for us, right? And how do we not let it become the head of, the CEO of Legal Aid and the CEO of NDS and the CEO of CAMBA are in like a backroom meeting with Eric Adams, right? And it's sort of like this backroom dealing of like industry collaborating with government in a neoliberal way that we know has failed us before, right? So I agree that sectoral bargaining is the move, but we can't let sectoral bargaining become the presidents of our respective organizations are all like, doing backroom deals with the New York City government, which I think is sometimes what has happened in Europe when they've deployed sectoral bargaining. So I do want to put that out there. And then I do have one more issue which I want to ask about, which is the concept, and I don't have a good answer for this or even a good framing for this question, but I would just like to hear about your thoughts on it, which is that there is in current US labor law the idea of a lawful strike versus an unlawful strike, right? Or a lawful labor action versus an unlawful labor action. And according to like the Hartley-Taft doctrine, which I don't subscribe to, and I don't think that it's politically or morally correct, but it's this idea that, that we're allowed to strike if it's about the terms of our wages and if it's about the terms of our employment and things of that nature, but we are not allowed to strike about issues of larger social justice. So I think, that's a huge problem for me. And
okay, Reed, sorry, I don't want to cut you off, Reed, but we do have a few more people on stack and we just have 10 more minutes.
So those are the three issues that I wanted to present to Brandon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, on the first one, there are no easy answers. I think that's a conversation that needs to be happening within, amongst members. And, no position I take as regional director, I think is going to be not informed by the different debates that are happening within the locals or the different shops. It's a serious one. I need to think more about it, just to be honest with you. The question of sectoral bargaining, I'm really glad you asked this because, the material like concrete wins you get out of sectoral bargaining, right? Because you take competition out of the picture. You're basically setting the standards across a given industry or in a given region. In some countries, like you mentioned in Europe, across the entire country, regardless of whether you're unionized or not, like it does lead to tangible benefits, right? But the thing we're asking about is like democracy and membership engagement and the integrity of our unions, right? It's not just about getting the good contract with the good benefits. It's actually also about creating a militant union culture, right? That starts from the bottom up, not from the top down. So there are absolutely ways for sectoral bargaining, I'm totally acknowledging that, to go from a fight over a contract into just like every few years the heads of the unions and the heads of the associations of employers get together and figure something out, and then maybe we'll see what the membership vote on whatever they come up with, right? Yeah, that's definitely a top-down approach to it. It definitely is in existence, but I think what it's gonna take to establish something like sectoral bargaining, I think in legal services, especially because we're taking on not only the employers but also government, is it is actually a lot more militancy, right? A militancy that's going to have to be built over time. It's not something that could get called tomorrow and suddenly we're all out on the picket line, right? It's something that needs to be organized, needs to be built up, and we need to be having those discussions at the shop level, at the local level, and then what I'm proposing is at the regional level as well, because it needs to be across the different memberships, and we need to be able to facilitate those spaces. That's a big strategy. It's a big undertaking that I think is gonna require militancy, possibly, if necessary, striking, right? That leads me to the next point about the strike. Like the PRO Act on the table, it's going to, if it passes, or other legislation that passes like it will legalize forms of labor action that are previously unprotected, such like sympathy actions, actions in solidarity. So there's potential for change down the legislative route. But folks in these unions know, in the history of your unions, like, you've taken risks, even when you don't have the guarantee of protection, of legal protection in actions, because the cause is that important. And I think that's really important to acknowledge. And I think that's something this sector can teach other sectors within the region, and which is why I'm proud to be an organizer within it now. Yeah, so I think it's not to be reckless about it, but when the time is right, when the time is necessary, and when everyone is joined in on the struggle and knows what the risk is, like, we've got to support those kinds of actions. The UAW wasn't created through safe actions. It was created through very radical actions in the 1930s. And I think that's the kind of energy the labor movement needs going forward.
Okay,
Thank you so much for addressing all of my points.
Thanks, and thanks, Reed, for the questions. Moving on to Ellen, and apologies for not calling you sooner.
Apology accepted. Brandon, nice to see you. So just so everyone knows, Brandon and I worked together when Brandon was at Harvard and I was on staff at the time. But I am the former president of Local 2320. And I thought maybe I was the most senior person until Mary Ann spoke up. I've only been a member since 1986. But anyway, I was the first woman president of 2320. And I have a concern that the UAW, the leadership of the UAW has predominantly been men, except for in Region 9A, where we, for the last 12 years, have had women in leadership. And I think that the work they did, Julie Kushner and Bev, has been remarkable. They've been strong and courageous. And one of the things I just feel like I have to highlight is, without their energy and pushing, I'm not sure that we would have higher ed organizing, because from the Brown decision to the Columbia decision, that was promoted by those women to the IEB. And I'm concerned because the IEB has right now 2 women on it and a third who's retiring. And so I'm concerned that you are running at, and it will displace a woman on the IEB who not only has been strong about higher ed organizing, which is important, but she also had, she really pushed the IEB in areas important to women, including, taking on a regional director who had been accused of harassing and, making sure that was investigated, and it led to that person being terminated. That's important stuff. It's important, I think, to have representation. I'm sure you agree. And with no women on the IEB, or one woman, I think the other woman is actually being challenged as well. I think that's a problem. I think we go back to, a bad IEB if there is no women representing. So I just would like you to address that concern. Thank you.
Absolutely. Definitely, definitely aware of it. And I think, first of all, Ellen, just good to see you. And, Ellen taught me a lot. And I think I just wanted to acknowledge that, part of the being in the trenches in those winters up in Cambridge. I think, I think what I'll say is that I'm running with a slate with two women candidates on it, 2 Black women. who that was a priority for our slate development as well, is precisely this question, right? And I think as another thing I'll say is that I was disappointed to see the Curry Solidarity slate not running women in the president's secretary, treasurer, and vice president positions as well. Those places should have had considerations for women on that team, on that slate. One thing I will say, like, I'm obviously not a woman, right? I think that goes without saying. But one of the proudest, I think, accomplishments of the Harvard Graduate Students Union was developing a feminist working group led by women and queer people to fight for issues that are, from the economic to the non-economic struggles against harassment at the job, and the implication that being a man and not being, not thinking about feminist issues or issues that affect women or non-binary people or queer people is not something that should be a concern. It's something that I take extremely seriously. And I think my work at HGSU would show that I'm committed to a feminist politics and queer politics to be able to advance those those issues, those politics through any level, at the local level, and then hopefully in the future at the IAB. So, but thank you for the question. I think it's not something I'm ignoring whatsoever.
Thank you. And we just have a couple minutes left on the clock, but there are several more people on stack. So I will just get the last couple in. I promised Sherry she'd be called, but before her on my list was Elizabeth. So I'm sorry, but those will be our last two questions. Please try to be brief with them, as we want to get people out as close to 8:30 as possible. Elizabeth, go
thanks.
ahead.
Great, thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak. And Brandon, thanks for putting your name forward here and for your work for the union. I am a member of NOLSW Local 2320 at Greater Boston Legal Services, where I've worked as an attorney for 21 years. And I support, the one member, one vote. And, I do recall, the work with Harvard folks. I do not recall seeing you at all at any of the CAP activities, including our lobby day, but that maybe you sent somebody else, Brandon, to serve, as a representative at that time. Part of the platform to me is startling and a little concerning. I understand the desire for radical action, but I feel like my union has done that. Your description of the history of representation by leadership of 9A just is at total odds with my 21 years of experience with my union. I've worked on several campaigns, ballot campaigns for expanding worker rights. My colleagues have advanced successfully legislation to improve benefits for welfare recipients, increase the weekly benefit amount, get education and training, and every step of the way the UAW was there. A year-round effort, 24/7, called upon and delivered. Got the AFL and other unions to support
I'm sorry,
these efforts.
Elizabeth. As I
I'm going to
mentioned,
wrap it up
we're at
right now, really
8:30.
quickly, really quickly. Okay, all I'm saying is boots on the ground, going out and getting ballot, thousands of union members out in the street getting ballot signatures because of our union. And I feel like you're doing a big disservice and misrepresenting the leadership of 9A.
Yeah, just to quickly answer that, I'm sorry, I would have to disagree with you. And I disagree with you not because I don't acknowledge that history. I think absolutely acknowledge that history. I think NLSW and ALA are models for the region. And the idea is how to bring that vision also to the rest of the region and to the different movements happening within the region. I would also just I think the part I disagree with is that what I'm presenting as this platform vision is also developed by 2320 members who might disagree with the points you just said, and are also possibly pushing towards thinking of beyond the electoral as the route for our struggle. It's within the social movements, it's within linking our struggles beyond just legislation. Not that legislation doesn't matter, not that electing better people and putting forward different laws isn't important, but I think we're pushing for a vision beyond that, a struggle solidarity-based unionism rooted in the grassroots, rooted in the communities. And I think that's the difference. Not saying that you don't also care about that, but I think the point of emphasis is in a different place.
Thank you. So I promised Sherry would go ahead. We're 1 minute over. So Sherry, if you could please be as brief as possible. And,
Yeah, as somebody who's pretty new to the union, I've only been working at the Legal Aid Society for 3 years in their housing division. And I know that there are a lot of new people at Legal Aid as well. I would like to actually kind of pull it back a little bit and see if you could explain, Brandon, like, what is it like now with how 9A works, and what is it that you want it and how you want it to look differently? Because that's something I want to bring back to my shop members.
Yeah, I mean, the takeaway is, I think, and thank you for the question, is that we're presenting a vision in this campaign about what it would mean to work regionally, union-wide, towards the goals of social justice, democracy, and militancy, or militancy as the pathway towards those goals, which necessitates, right, us working together. I think at the moment, we have some very strong locals, but we're working in isolation from one another. And there are very real limits to why that exists, right? Like we can't all be, working all the time on all different things. But I think the reason for that is not just the capacity issues. It's also because we don't have the spaces at the moment to actually organize. I'm glad we had this discussion here, but I don't know, we've had this discussion in many places hosted by the region. And I think that's the difference, right? That this is not a platform I'm proposing, or that we are proposing, because I wasn't the only one who worked on it. Members of your locals did. That ends with a campaign, right? Win or lose, this platform goes somewhere else. Even in a electoral defeat in the next election, this is a vision we're working towards. And we want any regional director to go forward and fight for this vision, right? And that's why it was so important for it to be articulated by the membership. But that's just, as a model, that is the kind of a leadership I would bring to the region. One that brings in the members into all these decisions, brings in the members into initiating these fights, and then empowers them to go and have those fights, and empower them to transform their locals, transform their shops, and transform their communities as well.
Great, thank you. Brandon, is there anything in addition that you would like to say in closing? We've now wrapped up our questions, and I thank everyone for their excellent questions, statements, and it's been a great town hall.
No, just thank you for for your questions. I think it was really important for me to just hear from you, hear from some of your concerns and also some of your ideas. My email, I don't know if Natalie you wanted to, or Alexi if you wanted to put it in the chat. This is a campaign event, so I'm also requesting donations, given that it takes resources to run a campaign like this and get in front of more members. And if you are convinced that this is the vision you also share for the region, we also have a pledge to be part of the movement. So just wanted to wrap up saying thank you, and yeah, let's get to work.
Thanks, everybody. So look in the chat for the donations link and the pledge link if you're convinced and are willing to put your name on your support for Brandon. And beyond that, thanks everybody again. This has been a wonderful town hall, and I hope everybody found it informative. And all right, take care, everybody. Solidarity forever.